Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Sarah Hill, and I am a research psychologist and also author of This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, The Surprising Science of Women, Hormones, and the Law of Unintended Consequences. And today I'm going to be talking to you about your ovulatory cycle and about women's sex hormones. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get the party started and give you talk a little bit about what I like to call hormones 101, right? Or an introduction to your cycle and your changing sex hormones. Right. So first of all, let's just acquaint ourselves with our cycles, right? And you may have heard of this cycle, which I like to call the ovulatory cycle, referred to as the menstrual cycle, which is fine. And there's a lot of smart people who call it that. But I prefer to call it the ovulatory cycle because this is what we call it in research. But this is also, really the point of having a cycle in the first place, right? We don't have a cycle so that way we can have a period, right? We have a cycle so that way our body can mature and release an egg that can potentially get fertilized and then lead to a pregnancy, right? And for that reason, researchers call it the ovulatory cycle. I like to call it the ovulatory cycle too. And here it is for you, right? And what you can see here, if you look on the screen, is I have plotted for you a 28-day ovulatory cycle, right? And I chose 28 days because this is the average, right? This is the thing that the doctor will oftentimes tell you is that there's a 28-day cycle. But it's really important to note that there's a lot of variability between women and that a lot of women who are very healthy and are having very healthy fecund fertile cycles have cycles that fall outside of this 28-day average, right? In fact, most women have a cycle that averages anywhere between 21 to 35 days, right? So you can be a woman who has a very different cycle from the one I have shown here and still be having healthy, fertile cycles. Across the ovulatory cycle, whether you are a 21-day cycler or a 35-day cycler or somewhere in between, all cycles are characterized by the waxing and waning of women's two primary sex hormones, estrogen, which is shown here with the dashed lines, and then progesterone, which is shown here with the solid lines. And what you can see when you're looking across the cycle is that we can really divide the cycle into two halves, depending on which of the two sex hormones is dominant. Right. And the first half of the cycle is what's known as the follicular and periovulatory phase of the cycle. So during this phase of the cycle, estrogen is the predominant sex hormone, right? And estrogen is being released as egg follicles are beginning to mature. And the one follicle that's chosen, right, the chosen one, eventually ends up fully maturing. And as it begins to fully mature, it releases high levels of the sex hormone estrogen, right? And this half of the cycle culminates with the release of an egg at ovulation, right? So here on this figure, we can see that ovulation has occurred right around day 14 or 15 of the cycle, right? Because we know that ovulation occurred because we have this big spike in estrogen that precedes ovulation, right? And then it begins to decline rapidly. And that's how we're able to determine on this figure that ovulation has occurred. And what you can see from this figure, of course, is that I've got ovulation happening around day 14 of the cycle. But again, this is one of those things where there's a great deal of variability inter-individually, right? So between women, but also intra-individually. So women don't always ovulate on the same day of every cycle, right? And normal range for ovulation generally is somewhere between days 11 to 21 of the cycle, right? Which is why it's really important to track your fertility using, for example, a piece of tech like Priya, because it can help you keep in touch with when your body is actually ovulating, right? Because most women aren't going to be 14-day ovulators, right? We need to figure out when it is that we ourselves are fertile if we are going to, get a handle on our fertility, and especially if we're hoping to conceive. right? So estrogen is the predominant sex hormone during this first half of the cycle, the follicular and periovulatory phase, which this phase begins on a day that the woman first gets her period, right? So day one of your period is day one of your cycle. And as you can see, estrogen levels begin to slowly increase as egg follicles are being stimulated and the chosen one begins to fully mature. And during this ripening process, the sex hormone estrogen is released in high quantities until the point of ovulation, after which progesterone levels crash. And what you begin to see is a rapid increase in the sex hormone progesterone. And this release of progesterone, which gets released from the vacated egg follicle, it actually becomes a temporary endocrine structure called the corpus luteum, and its job is to release progesterone, right? And this release of progesterone from the corpus luteum ushers in the second half of the ovulatory cycle, which is known as the luteal phase of the cycle. And during this phase of the cycle, pregnancy from sex is no longer possible, right? So you can't, this is the phase after which an egg has been released, and within 24 hours of an egg being released, sex is not conceptive, right? Because an egg can only survive outside of the follicle for about 24 hours after ovulation. And during this time when progesterone is being released, this is when, the period during which hopefully, if a woman is trying to get pregnant, the fertilized egg is making its way down into the uterus, where it would then implant itself and result in a pregnancy. Right, in each half of the cycle, which again is characterized by different sex hormones, is associated with doing different things. So the body is actually doing different things during the follicular and periovulatory phase of the cycle relative to what it's doing during the luteal phase of the cycle, right? And so we know that when estrogen is the dominant hormone, right, this is something that's occurring because the body is getting ready to ovulate, right? It's maturing an egg to be released and potentially get implanted. And it's doing everything in the body to set the stage for the possibility of conception. And this is why in my book, I oftentimes refer to this as the sex kitten hormone, because during this phase of the cycle, when estrogen is the dominant hormone, women report feeling sexier, feeling more vibrant, more alive, and also being more sexually motivated and actually having more sex than they do when estrogen is not dominant across the cycle. So just to show you one little figure that's taken from a research study and then made into a beautiful piece of artwork by the illustrator for my book, what we can see here, what we're looking at is a figure looking at a big sample of married women and just having them track what day they're at in their cycle, right? So of course, this first day being the first day of their menstrual cycle, right? And then as we get closer to the point in the cycle at which ovulation generally occurs, what you can see is on the y-axis, and we're looking at the proportion of women in their sample that was having sex on a given day. And what you can see is that during this period in the cycle, when pregnancy is possible and estrogen is the dominant hormone, what you can see is that a greater number of women are reporting having sex on these days than they are at other points in the cycle. And this is very consistent with what we know about estrogen and its role in women's sexual motivation. Right? There's been decades of research now in psychology and neuroscience linking estrogen levels and the presence of estrogen, in particular during this period of time when conception is possible, with increased sexual motivation, even among women who aren't trying to get pregnant, right? This isn't a conscious level shift among women who are hoping to have babies. This is actually women feel more motivated, more interested in sex, and they want more sex, they desire more sex, and indeed they're actually having more sex at this point in the cycle relative to other points in the cycle. The luteal phase, of course, is characterized by the dominance of the sex hormone progesterone. And progesterone, in a lot of ways, is very opposite of estrogen in terms of its impact on women's psychology and the way that they experience the world. right? And at the sort of physiological level, what we know that progesterone is charged with is that it's preparing the endometrium for implantation. So it is essentially getting your body ready for the possibility that a fertilized egg is going to implant itself, right? And in addition to causing these physiological changes in women's reproductive organs, which are of course very important in terms of conception, it also causes a number of psychological changes, or is associated with a number of psychological changes that also are believed to help facilitate implantation. Right? So we know, for example, that progesterone levels across the cycle are associated with women feeling sleepier. They report feeling hungrier. They actually eat more, and they report feeling more relaxed than they do at other points in the cycle. Right? I have this little asterisk on here because, of course, if you are a woman who suffers from PMS or PMDD, you do not feel more relaxed during the luteal phase of the cycle. In fact, you might feel really psychologically terrible. You might have extreme feelings of anxiety, extreme feelings of anger, extreme feelings of depression. This is very commonly reported among women who have PMS or PMDD, or premenstrual syndrome, or premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And this is actually believed to be caused not by progesterone levels themselves, but rather by women having a sensitivity to the way that their bodies respond to changing levels of progesterone. This is actually known as the hormone sensitivity hypothesis. So even though for many women, levels of progesterone are associated with feeling sleepier and hungrier and more relaxed, of course, if you're a woman who suffers from one of these disorders, this can be a period of intense emotional turbulence. And this is something that, of course, if you suspect in yourself, you can talk to your healthcare provider about getting more information about whether or not there are ways that you can help to minimize this symptomology, right? And knowing your cycle and knowing how it works and knowing how the hormonal changes occur and what the hormones are in charge of in your body, with, of course, with estrogen being sort of the sex kitten that's associated with conception, and then progesterone being more of the earth mother hormone that's associated with implantation. This can help you better understand the way that your body and like the way that you experience the world feels a little different depending on where you are in your cycle, right? And this is why I really like fertility tracking apps like Priya, which, in addition to allowing you to test when is going to be the best time in your cycle for you to be able to get pregnant, it also allows you to get in tune with your fertility, your health, and the relationships between your mind and your body, right? I find myself that tracking my cycle, in addition to journaling, can really provide important insights into the relationship between what's going on with me hormonally and then what's going on in my body. So I hope that this has been an informative presentation for you all. Happy tracking and good luck.